The Lincoln Spring Sales event is on now, and there's never been a better time to experience the feeling of driving a Lincoln. Pictures, sunlight through the available panoramic vista roof, music, weather, and maps on the 48-inch panoramic display, and a drive so smooth that inspiration rides up front. Stepping out better than you got in. That's the Lincoln feeling. Get behind the wheel of the 2026 Lincoln Nautilus SUV and discover exceptional offers only at your local Lincoln retailer.
CRM was supposed to improve customer relationships. Instead, it's shorthand for can't resolve much. Which means you may have sunk a fortune into software that just bounces customer issues around but never actually solves them. On the ServiceNow AI platform, CRM stands for something better. With AI built into one platform, customers aren't mired in endless loops of automated indifference. They get what they need, when they need it. Bad CRM was then. This is ServiceNow.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of True Crime with Caitlyn. Last week I asked over on my Instagram if you'd be interested in me uploading compilation style videos, and honestly the response was absolutely overwhelming. Unexpectedly to me, so many of you said yes, and I heard that loud and clear. So I have taken that on board, and this is the first of one of those episodes. A collection of true crime cases brought all together in one place. Some you might recognise and others you might not. I'm going to make sure to include a really good blend of older cases that I've covered with more newer cases, but all of them are equally as disturbing and chilling. I know that a lot of you tell me that you like to listen to my episodes while you're cooking or you're cleaning, and I have had so many people say even sleeping. So for those people, hopefully this is the perfect kind of episode to just switch on and get into whatever it is that you're doing. Fair warning, throughout this episode, my TikTok voice will make an appearance, and I apologise in advance. I really don't know where that comes from. And with all of that being said, let's get into today's episode. He told a friend, "I'm going to be murdered," and just days later, his badly beaten body was discovered over 2,000 miles away from home. I'm True Crime Caitlyn, and this is the murder of Blair Adams. Robert Dennis Blair Adams, who just went by Blair, was born in December 1964. He lived in the absolutely stunning Surrey, British Columbia in Canada. Blair was described as a generally very well-liked man. He worked for a construction company where he was very dedicated to his job, and his colleagues would all say that he was someone that they could rely on. He had a close bond with his family, he had a lovely group of friends, and he didn't have trouble with women either. At the time of this case, Blair was in a very good place in his life. In his younger years, he did get in a spot of bother, being convicted of a couple of charges, including assault and drug charges, but at the time of this case, he had completely moved on from that. He was on the up and up, staying out of bother. He no longer used drugs, he didn't drink alcohol, he was actually 2 years sober. Life was good for Blair, and so when he began drastically changing, the alarm bells were blaring. In the shortest amount of time, Blair had become moody, erratic, and paranoid. He had uncontrollable and unpredictable mood swings. He wasn't sleeping, he was barely eating, he seemed unbothered about his job, he would leave some of the sites open, and when his mum asked him what is going on, he said that he couldn't tell her. Now, everything I'm about to explain happened over the course of just a couple of days. So on the 5th of July 1996, Blair turned up at his bank withdrawing every single penny that he had, which was around about $6,000. He also emptied his safety deposit box, which contained expensive jewellery, gold and platinum coins, and so much more. He then jumped into his car and tried to drive over the US border. However, he was knocked back at Border Patrol. He was a young man travelling with wads of of cash, couldn't explain where he was going, and he had previous drug convictions. He fit the profile for a drug smuggler perfectly, and he was not allowed into the US. After this, he would go to his job at the construction site and told his boss that he was leaving. He was quitting with immediate effect, and he never returned to pick up his last payslip. He would then go home and booked a return flight to Germany. However, just hours later, in the middle of the night, he would show up at his friend's house in a terrified and panicked state. He was begging this friend to please take him to the border, but for whatever reason, this friend couldn't. Blair then started pleading with this friend and explained to them that he thought someone was trying to kill him, that they were hunting him down. By the 9th, Blair Adams had managed to pass over the Canada-US border and made his way to Seattle, Washington. Once here, he would buy a one-way flight to DC, which cost him around about $700. And now I am just jumping ahead a little bit here, but later down the line, this is something that really confused the investigators, because actually buying a return ticket would have cost him half the price. So why didn't he do that? Was he intending to not return? Blair would eventually make his way to Knoxville, Tennessee, a place that he had never been, a place where he didn't know anyone and had no reason for being there. He hired a Toyota rental car, and at one point he pulled over at a garage because he was having some difficulty with the car. A man came over and tried to help him, and Blair told him, "I cannot get this car to start." He was described as acting strangely, and when he handed this man over a car key, it was for a Nissan car, not a Toyota. So obviously it wasn't going to work, it wasn't the right car key. However, Blair insisted that he didn't have another one. Sources conflict on what happened here. Some say that he emptied his pockets and he genuinely didn't have another car key, and others say that he refused to look in his pockets. So now Blair was stuck. He was stranded in Knoxville and couldn't continue going on the move like he had done constantly over the past couple of days. Witnesses who recalled seeing him said that he looked nervous, irritated and paranoid. He would be taken to a nearby hotel, and he paced, walking back and forth in and out of the reception area for around about an hour before eventually paying around about $100 to check into a room. However, he would never get the chance to step foot into it. He left the reception area at around about 7:30 p.m. and 12 hours later, his body would be discovered. On the 11th of July 1966, police received a concerned phone call from a group of men who thought they had just came across a homeless person sleeping in the middle of the street. When the police arrived, however, they would soon realise that this wasn't someone sleeping on the ground. This was the deceased body of a man. 31-year-old Blair Adams had been discovered half naked and badly beaten. His trousers and socks had both been removed, and they had been taken off in a way that indicated that someone else had taken them off, not that Blair had pulled them down. Both of his shoes were also removed, however one was tucked underneath his head, almost as if he had been using it for a pillow. Surrounding his body, officers discovered hundreds of dollars in several different currencies, including Canadian dollars, American dollars, and a German currency. His bum bag was also found nearby, which contained the gold and platinum coins, but also gold bars. The jewellery that he had taken out of his safety deposit box was also discovered, and so this really helped the investigators to exclude that this was a robbery motivated crime. Eerily, around about 10 feet away from Blair's body was the key for the Toyota car. Where had it been this entire time? Blair's autopsy would show that he had died after sustaining a violent blow which ruptured his stomach. He had scratches and abrasions which were consistent with self-defense wounds, and he also had a prominent wound to his forehead. Despite the sheer brutality of Blair's murder, the only scrap of evidence that was left behind for the investigators was a single strand of hair, which led them absolutely nowhere. The investigators tried to look down every single avenue that they could. They followed every single tip that they were given, but all of them led them to nothing. They simply got stuck. They could not figure out a motive. Was this an accident? A crime of opportunity? Was someone genuinely trying to hunt Blair down and followed him over 2,000 miles away from his home to brutally murder him? Or did Blair experience a mental breakdown and simply got in front of the wrong person? That final one is more believable to the investigators, as it would sort of explain some of his erratic behaviour and questionable decisions in the days leading up to his death. 29 years later, this case is still unsolved. Comment down below and let me know what you think happened.
Adobe Acrobat, your team's home base. Collaborate within a shared PDF space. You've got your docs, your plans, your specs, and then invite the crew to build what's next. They talk up the teamwork. Here's an updated render. They think that this design could be a contender. And when somebody wonders what's the next step, AI helps you finish the rest. Bolts are tight, now your plan's refined. Run a smoother business when you're all aligned. Do that with Acrobat. Learn more at adobe.com/do-that-with-Acrobat.
This young man was sadistically tortured and murdered over a £15 debt in what was described as an orgy of violence. I'm TrueCrimeCaitlyn, and this is the murder of Martin Hyde. After their breakup, Chelsea Platt took the hatred of her ex-boyfriend Martin to a whole new level. Despite being pregnant with his baby, she would orchestrate and encourage him to be beaten by two men who did not like Martin. These men were James Dalloway and Jason Hughes. These two for months would bully and torment Martin, who was extremely vulnerable. He was homeless, he had learning difficulties, and he also had autism. For a very short amount of time, Martin had stayed at James's girlfriend, Lindsay Dunn's flat, and for this very brief stay, she expected Martin to pay her £15 as sort of like board or lodgings. But obviously Martin was homeless and he was jobless. He didn't just have £15 to pull out. So James and Jason would use this very small debt as an excuse to beat the living daylights out of Martin at every opportunity that they could. On the 30th of October 2009, Martin was ambushed by the two men who had forced him into a phone box and began beating him up and was actually threatening him, saying that if he didn't come up with the £15, if he didn't pay the money back to Lindsay, they would put him 6 feet under. They were threatening to kill him. On the 6th of November, Martin and Chelsea were out and about together in Stockport Town Centre when he abruptly stopped. He saw James and Jason in front of him and, absolutely terrified, he darted into a nearby shop to hide away from them. Chelsea had texted Martin and sort of tricked him into thinking that she was meeting a friend at the bus stop so that he would make his way over there. When Martin walked into the bus station, he was knocked to the floor by James and Jason, who had hid in a doorway, and while he was on the floor, they would take turns punching and booting him in the neck and face. After each of the assaults, Martin would go to the police and would report them, but not very often anything was actually done. However, after this attack on the 6th of November, James and Jason were arrested. However, they were released on bail, and now they were even more angry at Martin for getting them into trouble with the police. In the year leading up to his murder, Martin would report 15 different separate assaults to the police, yet it seemed that there was absolutely no help implemented for him to kind of break this cycle to help him get away from this abuse. On the 29th of November 2009, Chelsea had texted Martin and persuaded him to come over to her flat in Brecon Towers. Pretty much as soon as he arrived, Chelsea texted Jason and James and told them that Martin was there, and they immediately sprinted over to our flat, and they were there mere minutes after Martin arrived. They began to mercilessly beat Martin for over 2 hours. They kicked, stamped and punched him in the head. James had kneed Martin with so much force that he actually dislocated his own knee. Martin would be whacked over the head 3 separate times with a frying pan, and obviously after all this, Martin was excessively bleeding, so he was forced to clean up the blood with a sponge, and then this sponge was shoved in his mouth and used as a gag. Throughout the beating, Chelsea watched on in enjoyment. She was unfazed. She was happy to be seeing the father of her child almost being beaten to death. Lindsay, who again is James's girlfriend, this is the girl that Martin owed that money to, she came into the flat in the middle of all of this, and she would shout abuse at Martin, telling him that he was deserving everything that he was getting. After these torturous 2 hours, Martin was frog-marched out of the flat to nearby Reddishvale Country Park, where he was stabbed 5 times in the back and 3 times in the neck with a chisel. One of the stabs to his back actually severed his spinal cord, which would have paralysed him, and when he dropped to the floor, Jason and James continued to beat him, kick him in the head, and Martin is very close to death at this point. After all of this, Martin is then thrown into the nearby river. I don't know if he is already dead or if he is alive when he's thrown into the river, but even so, even if he was alive, his chance of survival was probably next to none. After enduring all this, he'll have had no energy left, and obviously he was paralysed, so swimming to kind of save himself would have been pretty much impossible. People who were actually walking in the country park had witnessed some of the assault and called the police. However, the police arrived just too late. They did try searching around, looking for Martin and looking for anyone that fit the description from the caller, from the witness's description, but they couldn't find anyone. Everyone else had already fled. Martin's body would be found the next morning, floating in the river by some dog walkers. Thanks to the witnesses, CCTV, phone data and microscopic blood spatter, police were able to find their killers. At Manchester Crown Court, both James Delaware and Jason Hughes pled guilty to the murder of Martin Hyde. They both received life imprisonment with a minimum of 25 years and 73 days to serve. Chelsea Platt and Lindsay Dunn both pled guilty to conspiracy to cause grievous bodily harm, and they were both handed a 4-year sentence, meaning that they could have possibly been released in 2014.
Zootopia 2 has come home to Disney+.
Let's go!
Get ready for a new case.
We're the greatest partners of all time!
New friends.
Gary the Snake. And your last name? The Snake.
Dream Team. New habitats.
Zootopia has a secret reptile population.
You can watch the record-breaking phenomenon at home. Zootopia 2, now available on Disney+, rated PG. And right now you can get Disney+ and Hulu for just $4.99 a month for 3 months with a special limited time offer. Ends March 24th. After 3 months, plan auto-renews at $12.99 a month. Terms apply.
Instagram teen accounts have automatic protections for what teens see and who can contact them, plus time management tools. And Instagram will continue adding built-in safety features to help create age-appropriate experiences. Learn more about teen accounts and Instagram's ongoing work to protect teens online at instagram.com/teen accounts.
I did everything I could to protect my children, but what I couldn't prepare for was the courts not to protect my sons. That judge signed my boy's death warrant, said Claire Throssell, the mother of 2 young boys who were horrifically murdered by their own father. I'm TrueCrimeCaitlyn, and this is the devastating murder of Jack and Paul Sykes. While at work, Claire would meet a man named Darren Sykes, and immediately they had a spark. He seemed a very sweet and charming man. He would try to impress Claire, bringing her flowers and roses into work every day, and eventually he earned her affection. The couple would go on to get married in 1995, and after this, Darren completely changed. He switched, he done a 180. He started to physically and verbally abuse Claire. He would throw remote controls off of her. He would force her to lose weight. He controlled what she was and wasn't allowed to wear, even down to the colour of her nail varnish. He would be constantly down her throat, harassing her, stalking her. He would even sometimes ring her up to 40 times a day. And sadly, Claire would also be raped by her husband. The couple would go on to have 2 sons. Jack was the oldest son and Paul was the younger son. They would not only witness but were sometimes victims to Darren's abuse as well. In one of the last attacks from Darren in April 2014, he lunged towards his oldest son, Jack. Claire quickly pushed Jack into his bedroom and she took every single punch for him. One of these punches kind of spun her around on her feet and actually caused her to fall down the stairs. Claire would later talk about how she felt in this very moment, saying, quote, "I realised then that as hard as it was to leave, I didn't want my boys thinking that's how you treat somebody in a relationship. And I didn't want them to see me hurt because that broke their hearts." So finally, after almost 15 years of marriage, Claire plucked up the courage. She was very brave and she left Darren, taking Jack and Paul with her, and she moved back in with her mum. But just because Claire, Jack and Paul were no longer sharing a house with Darren, that didn't mean that the abuse had stopped. Darren would continue to harass Claire. He would slash her tyres. He would send disgusting, threatening text messages to not only her, but other members of her family, including, I believe it was her sister, who was actually battling cancer, and she's receiving these horrible texts off of Darren. And he would also try to manipulate Claire, saying that he was going to commit suicide. After everything they'd gone through and they witnessed, Jack and Paul were terrified of their dad. And Claire would express this in family court, even going so far as to tell the family court that she truly believed that Darren would be capable of murdering their children. Despite this though, the court ordered that Darren was to be allowed unsupervised visits with the boys. Whenever he would show up to collect Jack and Paul, they would plead, they would cry, they would beg their mum to please don't make us go with them, but because it was a court order, Claire's hands was tied. There was nothing that she could do. On the 22nd of October 2014, Darren arrived to collect Jack and Paul. He had actually been texting them throughout the day, and this time they were pretty excited to go to their dad's house because he had just bought them a brand new train set. It was a really fancy one, a really expensive one. I think it was between £600 and £800, and the boys were really excited to play with it. Claire arrived home from work. She was running a little bit late that day, only 5 minutes after Darren had picked the boys up. But when she got into the house, her heart dropped. She noticed that neither Jack nor Paul had taken their phone with them, and together they had came up with the little sort of code, so if Darren was ever kicking off or anything had happened, they would text their mum this certain word and that would tell her something was wrong, please come and get me. And now the boys didn't have their phones, they couldn't do that. Darren had led Paul and Jack up to the attic where he had set up the train set, and while they were happily playing, he began going around the house and dousing it in petrol, setting 14 different fires. In the seconds before he started the fires, Darren had texted 6 different people saying something along the lines of, quote, he was going to be at peace. Darren then barricaded the doors to prevent anyone from leaving, but to also prevent anyone from coming in to help. What exactly happened after this is unclear. However, the boys in the attic tried their very best to escape. Paul, who was 9, was overcome by the thick black smoke. So his older brother Jack, in attempts to try and help him and save him, began to sort of drag him to the other side of the attic, and that is when he fell through the hatch directly into the roaring flames. Jack would be found by a firefighter, and the first words that he told this firefighter were, quote, my dad did this and he did it on purpose. Those would be Jack's final words. This is one of many pictures out there that you can see of the destruction that this fire caused within the house. Back at her mum's house, Claire had just finished eating when a police officer knocked at the door. She opened the door, and when she saw this officer, the first thing that she said was, quote, what has he done? She was rushed to the resuscitation unit where CPR was being performed on Paul. They had kept him alive as long as they could so that Claire could say goodbye, but the doctor told her that they had to let him go. Claire cradled Paul in her arms. His hair was soaking wet with her tears, and she would later recall the moment that followed, saying, quote, he looked at me and then his beautiful blue eyes just went grey. When people say the light goes out of their eyes, you don't believe it till you see it. The nurse came past and subtly closed his eyes, and he looked like he was sleeping. Claire then had to go see Jack, who was fighting for his life. He had suffered 56% burns to his face, arms, chest and back, and so he was covered in bandages from head to toe. So Claire couldn't touch him, but she could speak to him, she could read to him, she could sing to him. However, after 5 days of fighting, Jack would succumb to his injuries and he sadly passed away. And Claire has now lost both of her sons. I do just want to quickly mention before we proceed forward that Darren was found in the fire and he was deceased. He had died from smoke inhalation. Since the murder of her sons, Claire has channeled all of her grief, her pain, her anger into helping other people. She worked with Women's Aid campaigning for safety rights for children. She launched a campaign that would see that children are kept at the heart of every decision that would be made at family court. Claire saying, quote, if we don't change the culture, if we don't change the result, children's outcomes are going to remain the same and more children are going to die. Did this woman get away with the murder of her own twin sister? I'm TrueCrimeCaitlyn, and this is the case of Anastasia and Alexandria Duvall. Anastasia and Alexandria had such a close relationship that some people would describe them as one soul in two bodies. The sisters were best friends, they were inseparable, you couldn't have one without the other, and they did everything together, including going in the shower. Their love for each other was so intense that when it was flipped, their hatred and anger towards each other would be unbelievable. The sisters would get into fiery arguments and violent fights, hitting, kicking, punching, elbowing each other, and even pulling each other by the hair. Anastasia and Alexandria lived in Florida, where they owned and ran a yoga boutique named Twin Power Yoga. However, after some time they got into some financial issues. They couldn't pay the bills, they couldn't pay the staff, and they couldn't refund the clients that they owed money. So they up and left, moving from Florida over to Utah. Their time in Utah was short but not very sweet. After getting into some trouble with the police through drunk and disorderly, the sisters jumped on a plane and moved to beautiful beachy Hawaii. However, their struggles with alcohol followed them and even worsened. An ex-boyfriend of Anastasia would describe how she used to go on benders, drinking for days on end, going through bottle after bottle of champagne. On several occasions he even filmed her when she was in one of our states, and on one of the recordings he managed to capture her saying that she would kill him. By May 2016, the women are 37 years old. Anastasia is in a new relationship with a man named Federico Bailey, who was trying to help her get sober. The couple had planned to go out on a remote camping trip together when Alexandria decided to tag along, and much to the annoyance of Federico, she brought alcohol. He didn't let himself get too annoyed at this though, because he and Anastasia were actually planning on moving. They were going to be moving to the other side of the island and open up their own business and start a new life away from Alexandria, who was a bad influence and an enabler. At some point in the evening, Federico left the drunken sisters so that he could go and find a toilet, and when he returned, Anastasia and Alexandria were gone, and so was the car. Alexandria, behind the steering wheel, drove herself and Anastasia along the winding Hana Highway, where witnesses would recall seeing the women inside of the car, and they were fighting. They were all arms and elbows, hitting each other, pulling each other's hair, and I believe at this moment they were actually pulled over on the side of the road, when suddenly Alexandria took hold of the gear stick, put the car into gear, stamped on the accelerator, and drove the car off the side of the cliff. The car plummeted 200 feet down, landing on a bed of rocks, and witnesses would describe the sound of the crash, comparing it to the sound of a bomb going off. The rescue team were dispatched, including police officers, hoping that they would be able to save both of the women. However, Anastasia Duvall would be pronounced dead at the scene. She had died instantly from the impact of the crash. Alexandria, however, was miraculously still alive and was airlifted to a nearby hospital. When investigators travelled to the hospital to speak to Alexandria after she had been checked over, they were shocked when she point blank refused to speak to them. They wanted to know what happened, how and why did she drive off of the side of the cliff, and much more, but Alexandria stayed silent. She didn't even ask about Anastasia, and when one of the officers told her that Anastasia didn't make it, she was dead, they described Alexandria's face as being blank. Many officers would say that one of the worst part of their jobs is having to deliver death notifications to family members. And when one of the officers contacted the twins' dad to break the heartbreaking news that Anastasia was dead, he took their breath away when he responded, quote, "If anyone should have died, it should have been that bitch Alexandria." Alexandria's silence at the hospital wasn't the only thing that they found suspicious. Back at the crime scene, investigators discovered tire marks on the ground. These marks indicated to the investigators that the driver of the car had made a sharp, intentional turn over the cliff. The stretch of road that they were on at that moment was relatively straight, and these marks showed that the driver of the car had made a quick, intentional turn off of the cliff. A black box that was fitted on the
car to monitor speed, acceleration, etc. I'm sure many of you have had one. Showed that in the moments leading up to the crash, there was 100% acceleration up until it went over the cliff. There was no braking, there was no attempt to stop the car. During Anastasia's autopsy, her hair/scalp showed signs of forceful pulling. Inside of her fist, there was also long blonde hairs recovered, which was consistent with the witness saying that he saw the women fighting inside of the car. Back at the hospital, Alexandria's blood was also tested, and it showed that she was 3 times over the legal blood alcohol limit, so she was highly intoxicated when she was driving and eventually drove her and her sister off of the cliff. After speaking with Federico, who didn't find out that Anastasia was dead until a year later because he stayed back at the campsite, he told the police some very strange things that he heard Alexandria saying in the days or weeks leading up to the crash. He recalled Alexandria openly stating that she was going to kill Anastasia, and only days before the crash he overheard a conversation between Anastasia and Alexandria where Alexandria allegedly said, quote, "Don't forget we're leaving the planet on the 30th. Following Anastasia's death, Federico would say that Alexandria started to wear Anastasia's clothes, she started to do her hair how Anastasia used to do hers, and much more. After being discharged from the hospital, the police went to Alexandria's home hoping that she would speak to them, hoping that she would clear some things up, but when they arrived to her house, they found that it was empty. Alexandria was gone. Luckily, they were able to quickly track her down and found her nearby the airport and immediately arrested her on suspicion of second-degree murder. Hawaii police believe that the motive for this murder was that Alexandria was losing control over Anastasia. Anastasia was going to leave her. She was going to be moving in with her boyfriend on the other side of the island, and Alexandria wouldn't or couldn't accept that. They believe that she drove over the side of the cliff, fully intending to end both of their lives, and it would have went like that had the car went into the water and not landed on some rocks. Alexandria would opt for a bench trial, meaning that there was no jury involved. The verdict would be decided by the judge. And in February 2018, the judge who looked over the trial acquitted Alexandria Duvall of the second-degree murder of her sister Anastasia Duvall. He believed the defense, he believed that the 2 women fighting inside of the car caused Alexandria to lose control, and that is what sent her over the cliff. Not any murderous, jealousy-motivated plan. Hawaiian police fully disagree with this, however. They wholeheartedly believe that Alexandria Duvall has got away with murder. Comment down below and let me know what you think. She claimed that she was too pretty to be arrested before being arrested for the murder of her own mother. I'm TrueCrimeCaitlyn, and this is the murder of Afuff Hussein. 29-year-old Hind Bustami lived with her 61-year-old mother, Afuff Hussein, on Juneflower Drive in Las Vegas, Nevada. The 2 women had a very complicated relationship. They didn't really get along, but not for a lack of Afuff trying. Hind was a substance abuser who struggled with her mental health, and these combined caused her to have regular verbal and violent outbursts, most of which Afuff would get the brunt of. It wouldn't be uncommon for police to go to the home after getting reports about a domestic dispute. Afuff tried her best to be there for her daughter, to love her and to care for her, but she actually began to fear Hind, even confiding in her friends/co-workers that she worried that her daughter was capable of killing her. In August 2022, Hind went to a Chili's restaurant that I believe was inside of an airport. She ended up walking out without paying for the bill, and when the police pursued her to the terminal, she was incredibly hostile towards them. She was shouting at them, calling them perverts, threatening to spit on them, and said to them, quote, "You're only arresting me because you've never seen anyone as good looking as me." Also at this time, she had an active warrant out for her arrest for a separate battery charge. She was released and was supposed to appear in court for this charge on the 30th of October, but before she had the chance, she would do the unthinkable. On the 29th of October, just after 2:30 a.m, 911 would receive a chilling phone call. On the other end of the line was Hind, who told the dispatcher, quote, "I think I killed my mommy." When the dispatcher asked why she thought that, she responded, quote, "I did. I murdered her." Police were quickly dispatched, but by the time they arrived, Hyde had already fled. Security cameras caught her fleeing in a Honda car with a California registration plate. Inside the home, officers would discover the lifeless body of Afuff. She was laid in a pool of her own blood, covered in stab wounds and lacerations. Surrounded by shards of glass from a nearby broken glass table, and blood splattered all over the walls. We know from her confession within the 911 call that Afuff and Hyde had gotten into some sort of verbal argument when Hyde lifted up a glass table and smashed it over her 61-year-old mother's head. Using one of the shards of glass from that broken table that were now scattered all over the living room, Hyde would proceed to ferociously stab her mother and, quote, cut her neck off. After fleeing the scene, Hyde would drive 7.5 hours from Nevada to Barstow, California, where she would be arrested with blood still on her hands, dry and crusted. Upon her arrest, she immediately confessed to the murder of her mother, Afuff Hussein. At her 2023 trial, Hyde Bustami would plead guilty but mentally ill to second-degree murder. For this, she was handed a sentence of 15 years to serve.
Thank you so much for joining me for today's case. Don't forget to follow the podcast wherever you're listening so that you never miss a new upload. You can find photos and updates over on the Instagram at TrueCrimeCaitlyn. I appreciate you all for being here, and I'll catch you all on the next one.